Verse 14 is very important, and I want to deal with that in just a moment. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Now we know when he says the Son of Man be lifted up, he means on the cross. We can understand that. Now Nicodemus probably did not understand that. But notice the comparison he made here. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Jesus is referring to an account of something that took place in Numbers chapter 21. So let's look at that just for a moment today. Numbers chapter 21. Since he refers to that, let's just take a moment and see what he's talking about. Numbers chapter 21. And begin reading with verse 4. And they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to compass the land of Edom, and the soul of the people was much discouraged because of the way. Now let's stop just a moment and set the stage. These are the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, God's chosen people, God's covenant people. Prior to this, in a previous episode, they were in bondage in Egypt. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or not, The Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston. Has everybody seen that? What a great movie that is. And Charlton Heston, in the burning bush and everything, and Moses, and I love that. And Charlton Heston, he goes and God sends him to deliver the people, the children of Israel, you see. And so Moses, by God's instruction, brings all these plagues on the land of Egypt. And finally, what brings the children of Israel out is they kill a lamb, and they put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost of the house. And then when the angel of judgment, the angel of death, passes through the land, he passes over them because the blood of the lamb is on their door. And so Pharaoh finally says, let them go. And so they come out and they cross the Red Sea. God opens the Red Sea. He does a miracle to get them out. God brings them out of the land of Egypt by a miracle. Listen to this. He opened the Red Sea. Wouldn't you agree? Pretty mighty miracle. That is a miracle of God. He brought them out of Egypt, and they got out of Egypt. Now they're on the way to the Promised Land. But in between, when they got out of Egypt and God brought them out by a miracle and split the Red Sea, then he closed the Red Sea on their enemies and destroyed their connection with Egypt forever. Did you know that? He destroyed their connection with Pharaoh forever. But now they're on their way to the Promised Land and they got discouraged. I think this is a good analogy to our Christian life. You see, God brought us out of our previous condition of bondage by a miracle. See, being born again is a miracle, is it not? It's a miracle. It's the greatest miracle of all. A change of nature. Just by receiving Jesus, and He comes in and changes our nature, we're delivered from the hand of the enemy, from the hand of Satan forever. And the blood of Jesus, symbolized by the Red Sea, has closed around us. And see, when they crossed through the Red Sea and God closed the Red Sea, though they sometimes got discouraged and though they sometimes failed, and if you read the story, they got so discouraged, sometimes they even said, would to God that we had died in Egypt. And they would think about going back to Egypt. Did you know that? Listen, don't be embarrassed about it. They thought about going back, but you know what? Even though they got discouraged, even though they thought about it, they could not go back. Because God did a miracle to get them out, and He was not going to do another miracle to get them back. Did you hear that? It took a miracle to get them out. They couldn't get back even though they thought about it. But here's what happened. Though they were forever separated and they couldn't get back even if they thought about it, they began to experience bad things in their life because they began to get discouraged. And notice here what it says. The soul of the people was much discouraged because of the way. Listen, it's easy. That's easy to happen. It's easy to be discouraged and because of the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. That's easy too. This is called murmuring. It's easy to do that. Not a good thing. Not a good thing to speak against God. See, God's the deliverer. Not a good thing to speak against Moses. And then here's what they said. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread. There is no water. Our soul loatheth this light bread. I can just picture the way this all sounded. And you know what the light bread is they're talking about? When God brought them out in the wilderness and there was nothing to eat, God rained down food from heaven. Now how about that? He rained down manna, as it was called. Manna means in the Hebrew language, what is it? He didn't know what it was. Well, that's understandable. He rained down food from heaven. Every day they went out and they just picked it up. Now, that's a pretty good deal, I'd say. But here they're so discouraged, they're even looking down on God's provision for them. They're very discouraged here. And verse 6 says, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned. This is a great revelation. We have sinned. See, when people say, there's nothing wrong with me, I've never done anything wrong, and are self-justifying, that's not a good condition to be in. But when people understand and admit, I've blown it, You know, that's an admission that you're ready for God's blessing then when you understand that you don't deserve it. You don't have to justify yourself. So this is good here. They admit it. They understand. We've sinned. We've spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that He take away the serpents from among us. And Moses prayed for the people. Now please notice that the fiery serpents that are talked about were a product, were a result of the fact that they got discouraged and they murmured against God, murmured against Moses, and the fiery serpents were, we might say, the ramifications of their sin and what they had done wrong. Now notice in verse 8, the Lord said to Moses, now listen to the answer here. They've come and said, pray to the Lord for us. We want to get rid of these fiery serpents. We've sinned. Now, help us out now. So here's what the Lord said to Moses. Before I read this, you know what we expect He's going to say. What we expect He's going to say. Here's what we think God's going to say. What we think He should say is, all right, you people, you got yourselves into this mess. You get yourselves out. That's what we think. That's what we think He'd be just in saying. Well, so you got some trouble with fiery serpents, do you? Well, here's what you do. You just get you a stick and you see if you can take care of those serpents. You know, you just deal with it the best you can. That's what we would expect God would be justified in saying. You follow what I'm thinking? It's your fault. It's your problem. You deal with it. You're getting what's coming to you. That's what we would expect. That's not what He says. Verse 8, He says to Moses, make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and it shall come to pass that everyone that's bitten, when he looks upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it on a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Now we know from what Jesus said to Nicodemus, that He said, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. That whoever believeth in Him, you see, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Now when Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, what did that mean? Well, it was what was biting the people around the ankles. The serpents that were tormenting them. The serpents that were in the flesh attacking them. You know, serpents, what does a serpent represent? Oh, nothing good, does it? In the garden, it was a serpent that tempted them in the beginning. You know, we associate the serpent with the devil, don't we? Or with sin. But it's certainly nothing good. The serpent is you could say it's the devil, it's sin, it's everything, against God. And they were being tormented by that. They were being plagued by that. And so what God told them to do was put a serpent of brass representing Jesus. You know what it means? It represents the fact that Jesus was made sin with our sin on the cross. Or to make it a little more broad, maybe a little more pointed, He took on Himself everything that's wrong in our lives. He took upon Himself everything that's the result of everything wrong in our lives. Everything that is a curse. Listen to that. We sang this morning, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. That comes from Galatians chapter 3. And Paul says, we are redeemed from the curse of the law. Jesus has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. Did you hear that? Being made a curse for us. Jesus on the cross took upon Him everything that's associated with the curse. If you read about the curse in Deuteronomy chapter 28, it comes under three categories: poverty, sickness, and death. Anything that's poverty, anything that's sickness, anything that's death is associated with the curse. Jesus redeemed us from the curse by being made a curse for us. Jesus is the serpent on the pole. Now, that's not who He is, but He took that upon Himself. Now, here's the interesting thing. The people are being bitten by serpents. The serpents are on the ground, biting them around the ankles. You know what God's asking them to do? Listen to this. You know what He's asking them to do? He's asking them to look away from their own personal serpent that's tormenting them and look to the solution, which is Jesus on the cross. Look to the one on the pole. To look to the one on the pole, they've got to look away from the one that's tormenting them. They've got to look away from themselves. See, that took a little bit of faith. If you've got serpents running around on the ground, my first inclination is to be keeping an eye on those things. But you know what? In our lives, if we try to work it all out and deal with the issues ourselves, we're just going to be fighting serpents all the time. But God's answer is not you fight it. He says, look up here where I fought it for you. You see. And so it takes a little bit of faith to look away from our personal issues and look to where Jesus solved our personal issues. You see. And it takes a little bit of, we just have to reorient ourselves from time to time. And just keep our eyes on the Lord. And that's what He's asking them to do. Notice that He says, every man that looks shall live. Well, a person might say, I looked and it doesn't seem any different. Well, my answer is keep on looking. Keep looking.